Rachel Green, Brooklyn-based divorce mediator and collaborative attorney, and this is my podcast, Keep the Kids in Mind. Join me as I chat with other industry professionals about everything from smoothly navigating your way through divorce to prenups, all the while keeping the kids in mind. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Keep the Kids in Mind. I'm very pleased this morning to have a chance to talk to Bob Immerman, who is a school counselor and parenting educator. And full disclosure, Bob is my cousin. So I have known him since he was born. I mean, you've known me since I was born because I'm much younger than you.
Much. Yes.
Welcome, Bob.
Thank you. So, I'm thrilled to be here. I have to say that ever since we talked about doing this, I've been binge listening, and then I discovered that I could actually binge watch it too. And I am so impressed with the conversations and the dialogue, and I hope I can add to that with my areas of interest.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Bob. I'm glad to know that we have at least one listener who is also now a guest.
Okay.
So we started talking about this a few weeks ago because we were talking about the ways that parents tell their children that they're going to get divorced. And that was kind of the start. And I don't know whether we should start there. You know, you've been maybe tell us a little about how you ended up being a school counselor.
Sure. Well, I took kind of a circuitous route to becoming a school counselor. I had been a communications and theater major in college, did some work in radio in the early days after college, then got into advertising sales and found out that I was a really bad salesperson because I could affirm pretty much anybody's decisions. And if they were said no to me, I could kind of give them affirmation for that. And then I realized, hey, I'm pretty good at, affirming other people's decisions. Sorry. And then I thought, well, maybe I should reach into a career that might be more helpful for other people who need help in affirming decisions. So we had young children. My wife and I had gotten married. We had 3 young children. And having young children made me think about helping children. And so I went to school for school counseling at Villanova University, and they have an excellent school counseling program, which is also a counseling and human relations degree. So I learned everything there is to know about counseling, therapy, mental health, addictions. But then I also concentrated in school counseling, and I was very fortunate. Upon graduating, I got a position at an elementary school not far from my home, and the rest is history. I just finished my 27th year, and in a few short weeks, we'll be starting my 28th year as a school counselor.
Yeah, and what are some of the issues that you've seen come up with families?
Sure. Well, that's been definitely a constant over the 27 years is that, families change in good ways and obviously in the ways that you and your colleagues most deal with is through divorce and separation. And children that I work with, unfortunately, bear the brunt of that quite consistently.
So what do you see happens in school when parents are separating?
Sure. Well, fortunately, the fact that school is a familiar place for the students, generally speaking, we become part of the support system, and the students, the kids, usually in school, they're doing okay. They're with their friends, they're with a caring teacher, and especially at the elementary level where they generally just have one teacher. Or even if they're in some kind of learning support situation, they're getting very consistent support throughout the day. And then also in my role as a school counselor, I'm a part of that support system too. So we really work very hard to help them be okay in school. But here's where the crossover happens. And often kids are caught in the middle. And so I work individually with those students. And then I also run support groups for students whose families are in separate houses. And as the years have gone on, one thing that has evolved is we have many, many more students that are in that situation that perhaps their parents never even lived together, that their parents
Oh,
never were married.
right. I have more of those cases coming into my practice as well, that there were breakups and their parenting agreements, but they were never married.
Correct, correct.
Yeah.
And so sometimes those kids don't relate to some of the more classical uh, problems we think of with kids with divorce and separation, where they've gone through the trauma of their parents separating and the trauma of whatever legal battle was going on and the tug of
Mm,
war between the parents and extended families. That their frame of reference is just, this has been my life the whole time. Um,
interesting.
correct.
So, so does that make it easier for the children? Like that, I mean, well, I guess if the parents were living together, even if
Correct.
they're not married, that doesn't
Correct.
really make a difference to children.
Right.
They're used to having mom and dad there, or
Right.
mom and
But in
mom,
some
dad,
cases,
dad, whoever.
right.
They're used to having their two parents in the home.
Correct. Correct. But in
And
some
now they're
cases,
not going to have their two parents in the home. But then for people who never lived together,
correct. Yeah, in fact, sometimes it's hard for them to relate to what's happening with the other students that are in these support groups,
oh,
because the other students are saying, "Yeah, I remember the trauma, the grief, the ongoing fights," and they might be sitting there saying, "Well, my parents live in separate houses, and sometimes I have to deal with the stress of that, but I never went through that. I never
yeah,
lived through that
interesting.
trauma." Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it adds to, I think it helps to normalize for everybody. Like there's a spectrum of what kids go through with divorce and separation. And so they all start to accept each other as, okay, that's what happened to you. That was your experience. This was my experience. And I usually start each group when we first meet with, I sort of say to everybody, all right, what's your deal? Tell us about your weekly schedule. Tell us about where your mom lives. Tell us about where your dad lives. Um, tell us about extended family. So then they all just, it's just a very sort of very low stress way of just everybody tells their story. And they know that everybody has a different story. And that helps too with
Hmm.
acceptance,
Yeah.
and it helps to normalize whatever it is they're going through.
So it sounds like one of the things um, about school is that it provides like a foundation for the child.
Correct.
Everything at home is changing and the ground is shifting, and maybe they're moving to two new homes, or maybe one parent is moving to a new home
Correct.
and they're going back and forth, but school is the same. They get up, same time, they go to school every day, they see the same kids in the class, they have the same teachers.
Right.
And that actually, it sounds like, can be a comfort to children, that like every single thing in their life isn't changing. School is still, a stable thing that they can count on.
Right. And I think that most parents find that when their kids are young, the best thing they can do is provide a consistent schedule. Like every day might be crazy, but the kids know that Monday is ballet and Tuesday is soccer and Wednesday is whatever.
And no matter whose house they're sleeping at, they're still
Correct.
having ballet on Monday and soccer on
Correct.
Tuesday. Yeah, yeah.
No,
So
that's a
that's
good.
helpful for the kids.
Correct, correct. And I find that, when I have the kids go through like, what's your deal? My head is spinning because, it's Monday, Tuesday at one house, then it's Wednesday, Thursday at the other house, and every other weekend, but they know it's predictable. And so for them, that's their normal. And so that part of it becomes something that is helpful to them because they
Yeah.
know what to expect.
Well, I remember, I guess this was years ago, because now I think she's 26, 25. But I remember Olivia, who was a child of divorce. And I was asking her when she was 6, what's your schedule for seeing your mom and dad? And she had to walk over to her bag and pull out a paper schedule because it was so complicated. I mean, I think they might have had like Monday, Tuesday, mom, Wednesday, Thursday, dad,
Right.
alternate weekends, which is a very common schedule. But like for a 6-year-old, she had to like look at it
Yeah.
and have it like written down concretely. But
Yeah.
she's now doing well. So she
Yes.
seems survived
Yeah.
the divorce.
Yeah. So I think that the challenge becomes, and I've heard you discuss this in many of your other episodes, for parents. And the one thing I wanted to add about the consistency with you and your guests is the expertise that you all seem to have in sort of counseling skills, I would say. Your empathy, your listening, your understanding of where your clients are coming from. That's key. So that is also where my parenting education experience, and a lot of times, and this is something I would say to parents, is because of the consistency of school, I always encourage parents to team up with the school in some way. Reach out to your child's teacher, reach out to your child's school counselor if there is a school counselor there, because working as a team, we can really provide some good support for your child. Because in parenting education, the biggest challenge under the best of circumstances is sort of separating your needs from your child's needs. And when you're under stress, it's a very difficult thing to do. And what
Yeah,
could be more stressful than divorce?
right. And especially when you have like this really stressful circumstances of breakups. I mean, some couples come to me and and they just say mutually, like, the heat has gone, the air has gone out of the marriage. It's flattened. And we both agree it's just not there anymore. We don't have the zip we used to have, and we decided to separate. But then, in other circumstances, there's been infidelity, there's been financial infidelity, there's been secret lives, and somebody learns, in a shocking way, their whole world has changed. They've learned that the marriage is not going to continue. And then when you have people who are that raw, it's very hard for them to think of others, of how their children are feeling, because they're in so much pain themselves. I just also want to touch base, like when you're talking about the empathetic listening and trying to understand in mediation, that's what I'm always trying to do. I'm always trying to like understand where both people are coming from and how they're feeling and what's affecting them. But parents also can do that with their children.
Yes. In fact, in my parenting education, which is based on a program called Systematic Training for Effective Parenting, and folks can Google that and look it up. It is a very sort of a cognitive approach to parenting. And the people that developed it are therapists and psychologists. And it's all about sort of training yourself to get those skills, to try to, when they talk about misbehavior is really just behavior, but it's sort of useful to frame it as misbehavior. So for example, the easiest way to describe it is, so let's say you're on the phone, and this is usually prime time. As soon as you get on the phone, your children want to all of a sudden talk to you and ask you a million questions that are very important. So you become frustrated and annoyed. And so your own feeling is the jumping off point. If you feel frustrated and annoyed, chances are the motivation for your child's misbehavior at that point is attention. And so they give you this very systematic way. It's just these charts that help you identify why your child is doing what they're doing, because your child is not probably able to tell you. In fact, most adults can't say why they feel the way they feel sometimes. And children certainly, and it's not because they're not smart, it's just they don't have the life experience to say, oh, I'm feeling this way because of X. And later on, hopefully they grow and develop that skill and ability, and they can talk more. And that's where your school counselor and your kids' teachers come in, because teachers today are and a lot of people may not know this, are really trained in a lot of these soft skills.
Really?
Yes. A lot of education today is about mindfulness, and public schools all over the country are introducing mindfulness and social emotional learning curriculums.
That's wonderful.
For this very reason. Yeah. And that was um, in part a response to the pandemic,
Mm.
because we realized kids were going to come back to school after having been gone for a while with a real deficit in
Yeah.
social skills and being in
Oh,
touch.
right. Especially because little kids were isolated at home and not even interacting with
Correct.
other children.
Yeah. Yeah. So, that's where we can assist parents in giving that support to their kids and help them learn about helping the kids learn about what's happening to them. Um, I have a resources for kids too. There's an author named Julia Cook, and again, somebody that you can look up on Google. She has written a whole series of books for kids that, again, take this very cognitive approach for kids to understand why they behave the way they behave.
Oh,
And
wow.
some of it is designed for kids that maybe are on the autism spectrum, but they're really ordinary, everyday social problems that kids have. Like maybe a kid can't stand, there's one that I can't stand the word no. There's one about the kid who invades other people's personal space. There's one for a kid who interrupts all the time. And then the one that I use with my divorce and separation groups is called The D Word, and it's a book about divorce. And in the book, and this is where I really see kids' faces light up when we're reading this book, because in the book, it's about a boy named Otis, and he goes to his grandmother for advice after his parents have become divorced. And she coaches him about don't be the family messenger, don't be the spy, don't blame yourself, right? You didn't cause the divorce, it's not your fault, you can't control it. So let's work on figuring out a way to cope with it. So that can maybe sound a little harsh, but kids really relate to that because it puts it in perspective for them. Because again, the kids' main errors that they make is lack of experience in life.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's the classic thing. The kid blames themselves for the divorce.
But isn't that human nature? I mean, I find myself, blaming myself for
Correct.
challenging things that have happened in my life. And maybe it's harder for me to accept that, we all have challenges. We all have illness in our families. We all have death in our families.
Correct.
And I can't prevent that. It's not like if I had done something different, it wouldn't have happened. But it seems like it's just human nature. And kids, I mean, if kids say um, that it was my fault, like if I had done my homework every day, as soon as I got home from school, and mom didn't have to nag me, then my parents wouldn't have gotten divorced.
Correct.
And then that takes the divorce and it just puts it into like, just do your homework every day when you get home and you'll be safe. And nothing like this will happen again. It's almost like it's magical thinking.
Yes.
But it feels to me like that's human nature in a
Yeah.
certain way. Yeah.
It is. It is. But again, a lot of this is about teaching kids and how to put this into context for kids. And of course, that's a lifelong thing we all struggle with is what should we take responsibility for and what are the things we can let go. And
Right. Well, it's
sometimes
like
you have
that.
to be 70 years old, 80 years old
Right.
to finally say, all right, I'm going to let this go.
It's like that. It's from 12 steps, I think, isn't it? Let me change the things I can change,
Right.
accept the things I can't, and
Correct.
the wisdom to know the
Power
difference.
to know the difference. Right.
Right.
Wisdom. Right. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would think, and getting back to kind of a point that you touched on at the very, very beginning, is now the communication piece from parent to child. And I think what spurred our conversation was I had an experience where a child found out that their parents were divorcing and found out in a very offhand way from a comment that the mother had made. And so I called the mother. She had no idea that there were 3 children in the car. She had no idea that they had picked up on the comment or that they had heard it.
She was like on the phone with someone?
I don't remember the exact details, but
Yeah.
yeah. So her kids were in school, sort of like, heads were spinning, and one came to me, and then the older one went to the other school counselor that we have, and so the other school counselor, my colleague, and I called them on together, and she was totally blindsided. So, which brings us to, how can parents deliver this news? And this is, a really, really hard and the big challenge. So, in the parenting education program that I have taught over the years, they talk about the idea of, full family communication on a consistent basis. The idea of using family meetings to sort of have, like, almost setting up your family like you're a board of directors, and you're going to have regular meetings to sort of discuss any kind of family issues. Not that you're going to give kids control over things, but let's say you want to decide where to go on vacation. So you're not going to let your kids make the final decision, but you can have kids can have a say in what the choices are. And so ultimately the parents control that because they control the purse strings and they're the adults. But it's a very good way to frame family communication. So if you haven't built up that habit, it's okay if you call a family meeting and try to systematically communicate to your kids what's going to be happening. And obviously, the kids aren't going to like it. It's going to be very emotional and very heavy. But this is, again, where parents can team up with adults in their child's lives, whether it's teacher or school counselor. And a lot of times when I talk to parents, I also urge them, if they haven't already, and sometimes because of all the problems, they've already sought out help in the mental health community. And that is key, I think, also for success for parents is, I can give you one set of guidelines for communicating with your kids, but if you have a therapist that your family is working with, I would defer to that person's knowledge and expertise in, how are you going to do this? It's certainly worth, maybe it might take a few extra weeks to get to where you have the right presentation, but it is certainly worth taking that extra time to make sure when the news is shared, it's shared in a way, the best possible way. It's not going to be good news no matter what, but you want to share it in the best possible way.
Yeah. Well, I remember one family that I worked with where there were 5 children in the family, and the father called a family meeting, and 5 children and the mother came in, and he said, we're going to be separating and I'm going to be moving out. And that was how the mother found out as well, along with the children.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's a recommended.
No,
No.
that's definitely not recommended.
Because I think then the kids' whole focus would shift to the mother, who suddenly is like in shock and crying. And I mean, it was, what did that father do wrong, Bob?
Yes. Where do I begin? But therein lies, I think the answer to that question is that clearly there were a lot of gaps in communication in that relationship to begin with.
Yeah. I guess that's true.
Yeah.
But what a traumatic experience for the kids. And if the mother had at least had some warning, maybe,
Right.
Maybe she could have maybe then both parents could have been focusing on the kids instead of everybody except the father falling apart. And they ended up not finishing in mediation.
Yeah.
They went to litigation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I think mediation does require a little bit more contemplative thinking through in advance how you want to do this. It requires like a vision that this is the ideal way that I want to do it. And I'm not going to live up to that because I'm human and I'm going to make mistakes, but at least I have this as an ideal that we all come through this whole and okay. And kids know that we both still love them. And, and they're not going to thank me for destroying their other parents. So I'm not going to try to do that. I want to say, honor the years we spent together. We'll always be part of each other's history. but now we're going to start a new phase, and go with peace.
Yes, yes. And again, parents are raw when these situations are happening, and you're catching them at their very worst. And so what I'm sure your goal is in your practice and with your colleagues and all of the real experts that you surround yourself with, is to try to help coach families into doing this in a better way, so that it's going to be bad. It's going to be a trauma, but we don't want to exacerbate the trauma
Yeah.
with this sort of like ambush or surprise that you're describing. And obviously when divorce and separation and divorce are happening, nobody is at their best. And so I encourage, the classic cliche is that there's no manual for being a parent. But the fact is that there are a lot of books out there, and they've been around for a pretty long time, that are basically manuals for how to be a parent, and or the best ways to be a parent. And let's face it, we grew up in a time when there was no such thing as parenting. That was not a word or a.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah, I'm not good enough in grammar to say whether that's a verb or an adverb or a. I always talk about how when I came home from school, I went out.
It wasn't a verb. Yeah.
Right. I went out to play. There was no adult supervision.
Yeah.
And I might be with half a dozen to a dozen other kids, and we all knew what our time was when we had to go back for dinner, and that was it. So
right, our parents weren't sitting on the floor with us building Correct. Legos and Lincoln Logs.
Correct.
We were on our own.
Right, and we all turned out okay, I think. Right.
Some of us.
Right. But I think the introduction of the verb of parenting, to parent, is a good idea. It can only help to build your relationship with your children, and hopefully minimize damage. I mean, we're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to mess up and mess up that thing where our child is disappointed in us and we're disappointed in ourselves. But when you do things that are good, healthy parenting practices, you can minimize the damage in some of the other areas where things are inevitably going to go wrong, because things go wrong.
And depending on your child's age, you can even talk to them. When you make a mistake or you say something that you regret, you can apologize and
Absolutely.
say, yeah, I mean, that's good modeling, because we all have to forgive ourselves, and we have to teach our kids to forgive themselves, because we're all human. I mean, I had somebody call me once who said, I mean, I'm really hard to live with, and I understand why she did this, because I'm really hard to live with. I said, everybody is hard to live with. We all have our foibles.
Right.
I mean, there's nobody who's completely even keeled and always
Right.
perfect, and doesn't leave the kitchen a mess, doesn't forget to put the toilet seat down, doesn't leave their socks on the floor, whatever
Right.
it is.
Right.
Or the person who doesn't do those things and has no tolerance because their spouse does them. I mean,
Right.
It can go all ways, but that's not a reason for, I don't know.
Yeah. No, and getting back to the point that we were just on about supporting your kids through these really tough times, and apologizing, if you're a parent and you make a mistake, owning up to it and apologizing and role modeling. We teach kids, when they make an apology, to always include a recognition of how the other person must have felt. So, say, I'm sorry that I was mean to you at recess. That must have made you feel sad. Next time, wow, I will do better.
How
next
wonderful.
time I'll play with you. Yes.
To teach kids to connect those two things.
Right. And when parents do that too, it is very powerful.
Yeah.
Because not only are you owning up and saying, I'm human, I made a mistake, which is a good message for your kids to hear, but then you're also acknowledging what your child is going through.
Yeah.
And that's really powerful.
That's very powerful.
Yeah.
Well, my father never apologized. I mean, I feel like I never heard him apologize the whole time I was growing up. I don't think he could, his lips couldn't form the words, "I'm sorry."
Mm-hmm.
But when I was an adult, he apologized to me about, some of the hurts that, I mean, I was in therapy, so I probably was confronting him, but he had also gone through therapy and, his own growth. And he got to a point where he could say, "I'm really sorry that I didn't, that I did X, Y, and Z, and I didn't understand how it made you feel." And it was incredibly powerful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
then
so,
you get to have the opportunity. It's sort of a gift, because then you get to have the opportunity to, and it's not easy, I'm sure, to sort of go back to those questions that we were talking about before, letting go of the parts where you blamed yourself, letting go of the parts where you took responsibility for something that really wasn't your responsibility. And we hold on to these things for a reason. Even negative things we hold on to because they're familiar to us. So it can be really hard to let go of those things that are familiar, because that's a part of who we are. So why would we want to let that go? But your father gave you the gift to have that opportunity, to have that option, without it being an act of rebellion or condemnation of him. You could then, in your own mind, sort of have control over how you wanted to keep it in context. If you wanted to hold on to the hurt, that's your privilege and right. But if you wanted to let go of it because that was ultimately going to make you a healthier, happier person, then you have that opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is really a gift. I had a woman once say to me, is there a way that we can do this divorce so it won't affect our child? And I said, no.
Yeah.
This is going to be a huge turning point for your child. He will probably look at his childhood as before and after. And it will be a big change in his life. But can you help him, support him, guide him so he comes through it and he's okay and he doesn't feel like it's his fault and he knows that you both still love him and he's still able to function and not have depression and anxiety more than everybody else in his generation. Yes. Are there things you can do to support him and help him? Yes. Are there things you can do to make it smoother for him? Yes. So, but have no effect? No.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking of a student that I have that at first his father did not want him to participate in any support groups because he felt like, my son's doing fine. He doesn't need it. Meanwhile, the mother was requesting it, and the mother had a therapist that was encouraging it. And so ultimately, the father came around and agreed to it. And I think that perhaps there was some talk between the parents' attorneys where the father's attorney might have said to him, it probably doesn't look good that you're saying no to this.
Right.
If the school's offering it. And the good news is this child really is extremely well-adjusted, and he's doing well. And he is nice, and he has friends, and he really relates to the other kids in the group. And he's extremely friendly. So I think, in some cases, maybe the dad was right, but I was really glad that I had the opportunity to include him in these groups and work with him individually a little bit, because I think it just strengthened his position as a kid, in this environment and trying to navigate through.
Yeah. So do the parents have to consent before the kids can participate in the group? Like
Correct.
Both parents?
Correct.
The kids can't just go?
No.
Oh.
No.
I had a case years ago where there was like a 9-year-old who was going to one of the groups, and she came home and told her father, like, there was a new kid who came into the group, and she was like taking the new kid under her wing and explaining, like, this is how it's going to go. It's going to be okay. You're going to see both your parents. Like, like she felt like she was the expert, because her parents had been separated for 7 months already.
Yes.
And it was like a good thing for her self-esteem. Like, okay, I'm a kid of divorce, but like, I know how to do it. I'm going to help this new kid coming into the group. It's such a sweet.
It is great.
And I always tell parents that, I say it can build self-esteem to let them be with peers who are going through the same thing.
Right.
It makes it normal. It makes them not feel like it's their fault.
Right.
To see it's just something that happens to some families.
And we all have this sort of irrational, again, magical thinking as adults that we don't ever want anything bad to ever happen to our kids, ever. And that's not real life. And so if this really bad thing happens to your kid, in this case, your family is separating and divorcing, your child, you can communicate sympathy and empathy, but also communicate to your child that, they will endure, that they will find support. And you know what? A lot of us have difficulty in understanding that there are other adults in our kids' lives. I mean, it's easy, the teacher-child relationship, especially with elementary age children, it's sort of an easy one for us to figure out. But it can get a little bit dicey when the situation is bad and we don't know. We have no control over these relationships that our children are forming with other adults. And so that's a challenge that, that we as educators face a lot of times, that school counselors we face. And that's where our skills as being those empathetic listeners, able to provide affirmation for the parents and their fears and anxieties, it comes into play, and we can provide a lot of support. So, my main goal in being on your show is to communicate that, and I touched on it earlier, is team up with the adults in your child's life, because they will help you. They may have their own personal feelings about your situation, but bottom line is we're here for you and your children to support them through it.
Yeah, well, that's a wonderful message, and that should be really reassuring to parents as well. To know they don't have to do everything, they don't have to be everything and everyone to their children.
Correct.
You can be
Correct.
a team, taking care of them. Yeah. Well, Bob, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure talking to you this morning, and keep doing the good work that you're doing. And I guess, we're on the same team. When I'm working with families, I certainly have had, my eyes opened as to what the school counselors can do and the support they can provide for a family. And I will make sure to remind my clients of that as well. So,
all right, that's great. So thanks for having me on your show. I really enjoyed it.
Good. I'll talk to you soon.
All right.